Hello, everyone. Welcome to Proficy 2025, our annual leadership strategy and product launch webinar series. My name is Alexis Murphy, and I'll be your host today. On today's webinar, we'll be talking about Proficy Operations Hub and how it helps your teams increase operational efficiency and make better decisions based on real-time and historical plant-wide application data. Users can monitor, control, provide data entry, and perform analysis all in one place. Today, we'll discuss the latest Proficy Operations Hub enhancements that enable you to do things like reduce costly downtime with support for high availability, as well as zero downtime updates for smart factory cloud deployments. Enable more complex visualizations with flexible, powerful scripting capabilities, and accelerate screen creation through intuitive data selections and page data management. Before we get into today's presentation, I want to be sure to mention that today's event may include forward-looking statements. The information presented is intended to be an outline of general product direction, and it should not be relied on in making a purchasing decision. Now for some housekeeping. You should all see an interface with some buttons at the bottom of your screen. They look like the ones on the right side of the slide here. Please send any questions you have through that orange chat bubble button. Through the purple envelope button, you can contact our team. The blue paperclip button is our most important. It's where you'll find relevant content and resources related to today's webinar. Through that orange person icon, you can connect with today's presenter, Product Manager Amy Wooten. If you need any technical assistance, please reach out through that orange question mark button, though most of your issues can be solved by just refreshing your browser. And then lastly, we really ask that you share your feedback today. We have that pink checklist button where you can send us your different challenges, your different initiatives. It allows us to use this information to build our products collaboratively with your insight. So we really thank you for anything you can send along. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Amy Wooten. She is a product manager for GE Vernova's automation software, including the new cross-platform visualization, control, and OTBI solution, Proficy Operations Hub. Amy has served for 10 plus years in a variety of different roles, including product management, engineering, technical product management, and UX. She joined GE as part of the esteemed Edison Engineering Development Program, featuring rotations across key development initiatives. Amy holds an MS and BS in computer science from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She is passionate about developing software aligned to customer needs, and she has worked extensively with GE's customers around the world in industries such as food and beverage, consumer packaged goods, automotive, water and wastewater, and heavy industry. With that, I will kick it over to Amy to take us through today's presentation. Take it away, Amy.
All right. Hey, folks. Thank you for joining today. I'm excited to be here and help walk you through some of the new functionality in Operations Hub so that you can get a preview and you can understand how this can help you in your day-to-day operations. All right, so for folks who are a little bit new to Proficy Operations Hub, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the product. You can see our tagline here. We are a centralized environment to rapidly build industrial applications and design operations interfaces. So the basic idea is we are this environment that you can use to design operational interfaces. Obviously, customers have a lot of different data sources. They can be from the Proficy product suite. They can also be third-party products. And often they're looking to create these customized UIs for their different users. And that's sort of regardless of whether it's a plant manager who wants to understand the performance at their particular plant, all the way down to an operator who's perhaps on the plant floor and needs to respond very quickly to an abnormal situation. So we want to be this single pane of glass, this single visualization tool that you can use to create these UIs and create these applications across your enterprise. And so to do that, there are actually a couple different components. We have what we call the Operations Hub Designer, and you can kind of see here on the screen. This is the area that you'll actually be designing your applications. And then we have the end apps or the end applications. And these are the applications that your users will view and use in their day-to-day life. Our goal is always so that you can quickly and easily create these applications. And to do that, we want to ensure that you don't have to do any custom coding. So there are a couple of different components you have to configure in order to build these applications. These include things like data connectivity. So what are the different sources that you're trying to connect to, whether it's Proficy Historian or Simplicity, iFix, plant applications, right? Or again, a third-party source. And then there's the aspect of visualization. So how do I visualize that data? What are some of the different, elements of visualization, whether it's charts or tables or gauges, or process graphics, right? And then we also have screen building. So all of this sort of comes together in this area that we call the page builder. And you are sort of dragging and dropping your widgets onto the screen and dragging and dropping data onto the screen and binding the data to the widgets. So the end result from that, as mentioned, is those end applications. And really what you build is up to you, up to the problems you're trying to solve within your business. We just try to provide for you the tools that you need to build those screens for your users. All right. Just to give a quick overview of our development timeline, we are a fairly new product. Our first initial release was around 2020. And you can start to see in those earlier releases, we were a bit more focused on some of the fundamental building blocks. You'll see here that we have a number of different data connectors, including REST and SQL, as well as OPC UA. We also have a number of custom connectors for the Proficy products, as we mentioned. We also built out our visualization library. We talked about this earlier, tables, trends, gauges, right? All of those different types of widgets. We also have specialized widgets like widgets for viewing iFix and Simplicity screens within OpsHub, alarm widgets, batch widgets, etc. In our more recent releases, we've been focused on both user experience as well as sort of deep dives into certain use cases. So for example, we had one release that was very much focused on trending and analysis. And you'll see that many of our features in that release were focused around how to improve the trend card, how to enable sharing in trend, how to add spec limits to trends. We then sort of moved on to start with our basic HMI designer. So you'll see that we had different layouts to support HMI design, a graphics editor as well, and we also moved into Configuration Hub. So you'll sort of see these as a theme in our future releases as well, sort of drilling in, and every release we try to keep adding more functionality, but also keep reviewing user experience to make sure that everything we provide is usable and that we live true to our promise of being able to quickly and easily create those end applications. All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Operations Hub 2025. This is the most recent release of Operations Hub, so latest and greatest. Probably our largest feature, our main feature here is scripting. It's definitely something that many customers have reached out to us over. But basically, it's the idea that you want to extend either the visualizations or functionality in your application to do something custom. Based on scripting, and this can be based on existing data sources. This can be based on, logic, different math functions that you put together in a free-form scripting interface. The next area for Operations Hub 2025 is this enhanced data binding. And the idea here, again, is, we were taking a look at your experience with Operations Hub and in particular, how do you deal with data, particularly if you are working with HMI screens, which often have many, many elements on your screen, and you're binding to frequently live sources, right? Either live sources or perhaps historical data a little bit as well. So we did some improvements there for how you deal with data. We also looked at performance for those use cases, especially for load time of those pages that are quite heavy with widgets. Next, you'll see here that we have a new connector in Operations Hub. This is the GraphQL connector, and this is the ability to connect with these GraphQL sources. The main one of these that you'll probably be interested in is for plant applications. which is another Proficy product, they are now supporting a GraphQL API. And so in anticipation of this, Operations Hub has a connector that will provide you access to those APIs. And then finally, there's another a column there of sort of other things we've supported. Trend remains a large focus for us. You'll see here that we have enhancements around being able to view future data, which is coming out in support of Proficy Historian. So in Proficy Historian, you can now have future data, and in Operations Hub, you can now trend that data. You have additional options for date time display. So you can format the data, the date time in a way that is useful to your users. We also had a number of different user experience enhancements, both in Trend and in the designer in general. So things like, refining how you work with scrolls and pagination, having search in multiple places now in the designer, so you have an easier way to find elements as you're doing page building. We also allow you to copy between pages. This is a really big thing, especially if you are making multiple pages and you want to sort of recapture the work that you've done on one page and use some components on a different page. So that's a really big one for us. And then just to mention in the background that we are slowly doing some modernization. We're moving from AngularJS to Angular, and we've been biting off pieces of those in every release. And for this release, we handled converting our end application to Angular tech stack. So that's just an overview. And of course, through all of these, right, we have some additional items for tech debt, for UX debt, and for critical customer requests. These are things that we work on sort of every release to make sure we're continually improving our quality and usability. Okay, so now we're going to go in just sort of the next level and take a look at each of those features that we mentioned earlier. And we're going to start off here with simplified data binding. Okay. So for folks who have worked with Operations Hub data and page building before, you might know that one of the elements that we work with as you build your pages, one of those elements is called queries. Okay, so this is sort of the mechanism that we use in the background for you to be able to interact with your data. And that's sort of if you're using a REST call, or if you're hitting a SQL store procedure, or you're trying to get data through OPC UA. So we've had quite a bit of feedback now over the last couple of releases, both directly from customers as well as through some of the user experience testing that we've done. And folks have given us some pretty consistent feedback that they would like to be able to interact with their data in a more natural way, right? They kind of get the idea of queries, but they don't really understand why they need yet another item, yet another element to configure, especially if they're working with Proficy data. So data that's coming from iFix, Simplicity, and Historian. So with this feedback and with the help of our UX team, we've sort of taken a look at the experience, and our goal was, how do we let users configure their screens, but make it feel that they're interacting directly with tags, right, or asset references. So you don't actually have to see the word query anywhere. You don't have to deal with queries unless you're doing something more advanced. So that was sort of our starting point. And you'll see here that we provided a couple of different mechanisms for you to do that. One of these is drag and drop integration. So if you go into Operations Hub and you look for data, right? Let's say you have your widget there, you want to drop some data on the widget. So you go ahead and browse for that data. Once you drop it on the widget, the old flow was you would have to go to page data and you'd have to modify some settings to be able to use it. Now, when you drop the data, we actually provide you a little pop-up, and it gives you, the most important fields that you would need to fill out. Again, if you're using iFix, Simplicity, or Historian data. So we're sort of presenting to you, data settings without you ever having to go and, run around the UI and look for this thing called queries that you don't even really understand why it exists. Okay. Another item that we have here for refining your experience, let's say you have a widget, you've added it to the page. You can go on the right-hand side of the screen, right within the context of a widget, and click the tag button and browse directly for data for that specific widget. So again, if you've experienced the old way of working with Operations Hub, you would add your widget to the page, then you might go to page data, you might add a query to the page and do the binding. Here, we give you the experience where I've just added a widget and now I'm going into that widget and configuring data for that widget, right? Without ever, again, seeing the concept of a query. So all of this is with the goal of providing a more natural experience, a more intuitive experience, especially if you're coming from working with one of our Proficy portfolio products like iFix, Simplicity, or Historian, right? We want you to feel like you're interacting with that data instead of some intermediate construct like queries. So in addition, I'll just mention that, we have made some simplifications to data management on the page as well. I mentioned you feel like you're going into a widget and you are working with the data for that widget. We now have a tighter binding between one widget and that data instead of the data belonging to the entire page. So what that means is if you delete that widget, then the data is also gone from the page. No longer do you have sort of this two separate elements that have to be managed. That data is tied to that widget. And if you decide, hey, I'm looking at this current value and I want to change to historical value, now you can do that directly from the widget. You don't have to go to the page and sort of remove one source of data and add a new source of data. You can do all the work you need right within the widget. So the goal here, hopefully with these changes, your pages are easier to build, right? First time trying to understand, how to work with the UI, but we also hope that they are a lot easier to debug and to maintain as well, right? Sort of the idea that you can look into a widget and see the data for that widget instead of having a couple of hops through queries, we think will make it a lot easier for users to understand what's going on, especially if they have to come in later on and make some changes. So that covers simplified data binding, one of the features that's coming out in 2025. All right, if we move on, you'll see here that we have scripting. As I mentioned, this is probably the biggest feature that we have for 2025. And the idea here is that users can now have the ability to customize data and visualizations with a scripting interface. So how this works is we let you create basically a library of scripts. You can see here on the main page that there is a list of scripts, and you can go ahead and say, add a new script to my library. And when you do that, you're provided this editor area. There are three sort of main items that you have to be worried about. One is the inputs. So what am I providing into the script? One is the outputs. What can I expect as an output from the script? And then in the middle here, you see this area, which is the body. So what is the logic of the script? We support Python scripting for this first round. And so really, once you're in the body of the script, your goal is to take the inputs and write up your custom logic and assign your outputs to be the result of that custom logic. So this is a very powerful feature, right? There are a number of different ways that this can be used. I've just listed a couple to the left-hand side, but you can see things like selecting portions of a data set, joining data from multiple sources, formatting data, etc., right? In the past, if there was some custom logic that you needed, if there was some way that you wanted to interact with the data, you were basically limited to whatever that underlying data source provided, right? So let's say you wanted to sort some data that was coming through by, let's say it's defects, and then there is a criticality to the defect, right? Maybe you want to sort it by criticality. Unfortunately, we would always have to look to what does that underlying data source provide? Does it expose a way to sort? And if the answer was no, then you were a bit sorry out of luck, right? You were sort of limited to what that source allowed you to do. Here, we're allowing you to inject that custom logic sort of in between when you grab your data and when you use your data within the application, so that you can now, like I mentioned, do data validation. You can do sorting or filtering of your data set. If you wanted to have a grid on your screen and you wanted to show data within one grid from multiple sources, like let's say you want to show data from both Simplicity and Plant Apps in the same grid. In the past, you wouldn't be able to do that. Now you can create a script that will process both inputs and present them to the table as one unified data set. So, really powerful feature, and we hope that folks will see this as an extensibility into Operations Hub for scenarios that were previously you weren't able to accomplish. Hopefully now you can go ahead and use scripting to get that sort of custom handling and custom logic in your app creation. I'll just mention again, this is using Python scripting. A lot of folks have questions about that. We did consider JavaScript as well, but in the end, we went with Python. And I will also mention that this is particularly in application scripting. So you created your library of scripts, and then when you go to build your page, you are adding that script to the page. It's very much tied to the user's experience. If a particular user sort of opens up a page, the inputs that are fed into the script depend on the selections that particular user made, right? The time when the script triggers might be tied to when that particular user clicks the submit button. This is opposed to other scripting requests. We've had a lot of feedback on the need for eventing. We've had the feedback on the need for sort of scripts that are always sort of running in the background. So I do want to let folks know that the team has already started work on that. It's partially built. It just wasn't done in time to make it out the door with the Operations Hub 2025 release. So for the first drop right now in this release, you get in-page scripting, and then you can look ahead to event-based scripting and server-side scripting in future releases. All right, and lastly here, I just want to mention the GraphQL connector. This was actually a functionality that was developed in collaboration with the Plant Applications team. So the idea here is, when you work with data in Operations Hub, again, you've always sort of been limited to how is the data presented and what are the options that are given to you based on that underlying source. And there was really no easy way to sort of combine sources, to format your data, to sort of reorganize how it's presented. Now with this GraphQL connector, it is based on GraphQL sources, which have this ability to basically mutate your response, right? You can sort of take the fields that you're expecting. It can come from multiple sources. You can determine which you're interested in and which you're not interested in. So you don't have to remember the exact endpoints. It feels like you're working just with that data, right? And your performance is actually a bit better as well, because instead of having to deal with the entire data set, including the fields that you're not interested in, you can limit it to just the fields you care about. And so with this new GraphQL connector, you will have access to any GraphQL data source. The main one that I mentioned earlier is the Plant Applications GraphQL API. Right, so you will be able to come in, you'll be able to create a new GraphQL source. You can browse the Plant Applications model, right? And you can see what are the different fields that are available and select what are you looking for and have a query based off that. So it really does simplify your access to Plant Applications data in particular, and you have a reduced need to go in and look up specific APIs because it's sort of there out of the box. You can browse the the types and the elements in the types, and just select the things that you're interested in. So again, the goal here is sort of flexibility in getting the data that you want for display on screen. And we hope that with this new feature, you'll be able to achieve that with the GraphQL connector. All right, I do just want to give a quick nod to some of the runtime performance improvements that were done this release. I had mentioned that one of our use cases is to support HMI screen building. And as part of that, we have to make sure that Operations Hub is performant to folks' expectations of an HMI screen. So we had already received some feedback that, in certain scenarios, the pages were taking a while to load. And this was just not going to cut it, especially if you have an HMI screen with dozens to hundreds of elements, right? If every element takes a second, then, well, that's a lot of seconds if you have hundreds of elements on the screen. So this was a very targeted performance fix, right? We went in and we looked in particular for the widgets that we thought were most likely to be used by HMI developers. And this includes things like HMI graphics and value displays. So, displaying data on the screen, like a data link, right? And we also focused our enhancements specifically to Proficy data sources, right? So iFix, Simplicity, and Historian. And you'll find here, just take a look at the table on the screen. We tested with hundreds of widgets. You can see that there are numbers here in different scenarios ranging from 300 widgets to 1,000 widgets. And we also varied the data retrieval settings, right? So whether it is the data is being pulled, every few seconds or on some timer, versus whether the new data is pushed to the user, right? And the changes that were made in the Operations Hub widgets showed a wide improvement across all the scenarios, right? You can just go ahead and take a look at these numbers for percent change. You can see that there were sort of scenarios before where we would get overloaded. So for example, here, if there were 1,000 different widgets and you had how many different queries supporting that, now we've reduced it to a few seconds to update the screen. So this will focus again on HMI cases for a specific set of widgets and for specifically the Proficy data sources, iFix, Simplicity, and Historian. And you can see that there's really significant improvement on page load, on page reload, and also sort of the update rate once your screen has already been opened. Okay. So with that, just trying to keep an eye on the time here. We're going to go ahead and just take a look at some demos of the actual functionality that you can expect in 2025. I always find this useful just to actually see it with your own eyes, and you'll have a more concrete example of how it works. I'm probably going to talk pretty fast here, but there are some pre-recorded screens, and I'll try to narrate them as you see the screens changing. Okay, so here we're going to demo the simplified data binding feature. You'll see that a user has started out with a blank page and they have dropped a widget on it. That's a common way to start your screen building. Here they're going to go and browse for data. So you can see here that we are looking at Historian data. We can select a tag and you drag and drop it. And there you have it. Automatically, it confirms that you are looking at current value. And you can see that a specific tag on the right-hand side was bound to that widget, okay? If you want, you can come in here and you can still have access to all the query details on the back end. So if there's something you want to confirm or change, you can do that, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Alternatively, you can go into the page data area and you will also see the tags that were used on the page and the queries. Okay, so that was just simplified data binding through drag and drop. We're going to go through it one more time just so you can see. We first add the widget to the screen. Okay, Very good. Then we go to the data tab. We browse for our data. We're starting with Historian this time. Okay. And if you drag and drop your data onto the screen, you get a quick pop-up that confirms your data settings. It confirms that you want a current value, and you can see all the details on the right-hand side of the screen for what tag you are binding to. Okay, so let's move on to another example, again, of simplified data binding. Here, we're going to start again with grabbing a widget and adding it to the screen. This time, however, we're clicking on the widget, and if you go on the details panel, you'll see that there's an area now that lets you browse for tags. If you pick select tags, you're provided that same browser, right? So you can look for historian data, you can look for tags, you can look for assets, you can look for iFix and simplicity data. Here we've picked historian, and we're actually interested in historical values, right? Because we're going to trend something. And you saw that the all the data settings are just immediately provided to the user right in that pop-up. You can come back in, you can add more tags, and again, all the data retrieval settings are just provided to that user. Okay. So if you want to, you can still go in and sort of look at, here are all the tags on the page. You can do that. You can come back in, you can remove data, and you'll see the management there. When you remove data, it automatically removes any queries associated with that on the page. So one more time, let's walk through it. The user goes ahead and grabs their line chart. They're interested in plotting some historical data on a trend. You have this new area within the widget settings that says, hey, I want to browse for a tag or for assets, right? So you can come right in here. You can browse for the tags you're interested in. You are presented with the data retrieval settings. If you want to change from current value to historical value, you can absolutely do that right within this pop-up. You can see the tag that you have selected, right? And if you want, you can go with that, or you can come back inside and you can change your tags and or change your data settings, all within the context of a widget. I am working within a widget. I didn't have to leave this part or this area. You can, of course, go back into the page data. You have access to all the tags that were used, all the queries that were used. And you'll notice that if you remove data from a widget, that's actually automatically removed for you on the page data side. Okay, so with that, we're going to pivot now, and we're going to look at scripting. We're starting out here in the Operations Hub plugin area within Config Hub, and you'll see that our user already has a number of different scripts. They can go ahead and add a script. So we can go ahead and put here a name. We're just going to make a simple script for adding two numbers. So we call this add two numbers. And the first thing you want to think about is, what are my inputs to the script? So in this case, because we are adding two numbers, we're going to have input 1, which is a number, and we're going to have input 2, which is going to be the second number, right? Because our function is going to add two numbers together. Okay, so we have that. Hopefully you noticed we also supplied some default values of 10 and 5. So the next thing we have to worry about is the output, right? And we're just giving it a name. In this case, we've named it sum, and we're saying that it's a number. All right, so we have our inputs, we have our output, and now your task is to actually write the script, okay? So what we're going to do here is sort of find a way to set the output equal to the first input plus the second input. And if you'll look a little bit closely on the screen, you'll see that there are ways to refer to input 1 and input 2, and you can use that right within your script as you do your calculations. Okay, so here we have output of sum equals inputs of input 1, and we have inputs of input 2. All right, so we're just setting the output to be, one input plus the second. Obviously, this is just a simple example that's sort of meant to illustrate the functionality and how you'd make a script, but in real life, you would probably have significantly more business logic here. On the bottom, you'll see that there's a button to test your script, and that will actually run your script with the default inputs that you provided, and present to you the output of your script. Okay. So again, you start out here, you have your scripts. You can create a new script. The items you just want to think about are, what are the inputs to the script? What are the outputs to the script? You can, of course, have one or more. You then define your body of your script. Okay, what is the logic that you want to have the script do? And then you set your outputs to be some function of your inputs. Okay. And then finally, again, this is just going to play in the background, but you have the chance to actually test your script, because we want you to be doing sort of incremental development, testing your logic as you go along, even before you've added your script to the page. So you provide default values for your inputs, you hit the test button, it will actually run your script with all the inputs you provided, and you can see a printout of your outputs just to ensure that your logic is working as you expected it. Okay, so let's say you have built up your library of scripts and you actually want to go ahead and use your script within the page. Easy to do. And if you have experience with Operations Hub, you'll be able to carry over a lot of your skills and knowledge and apply them to scripts. So here we have a part of a pre-built page. There are 2 text fields where you can enter numbers, and they are tied to 2 separate globals. Okay. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, if you go to the Data tab, you can now say, hey, I want to add a script to the page, and I can browse for my script that I just created. Once you've added it to the page, it appears on page data, right? And you can see all the details on the right-hand side, including when will the script run, what are the inputs, what are the outputs. So if you come into this inputs area, right, for input 1, we can say, hey, I want to tie this input 1 to one of the globals that is fed by a text field, and I want to tie input 2 to another global that is used by the text field. Okay, so we're just connecting the text field to the global and the global to the script. Next, we're going to go to this button, and you'll see here that there's a new action that you can place on a button click, and it's called Execute Script. Right? So you can decide, hey, I want to run this script when a user clicks a button. And then finally, if you click on the gauge, you'll see that you can display the output of a script. So whenever that script is done executing, the output of the script will be shown in the gauge. All right. So with that, you can go ahead and save, and then you can launch your end application. So as expected, you have 2 text fields. Remember, these are tied to 2 globals. When you enter those values and you hit submit, the script runs in the background, all right? And it takes the 2 values that were entered into the text field, feeds it into the script, runs the script, and provides the output, which is now mapped to your solid gauge. Okay, so hopefully you see every time here that you change the inputs, you can see that the script has run and the results are shown in the gauge. Okay, pretty simple example, just with static values, that are just provided by the user in the text field, and you hit the button. We're going to now move on to another example that is a bit more dynamic and involves feeding in data that's coming from queries. Okay, so let's look at this dynamic values area. We're going to make some changes to this page. Number 1, we're going to change our script so that it runs not on button press, but whenever one of the inputs changes. Okay. We're also going to remove the button because we don't need it anymore. So here we're going to go ahead and get some data on the page. Here we're just grabbing some data from Historian and we're plopping it into the first text field. And then we're getting some data from Historian, a different tag, and we're plopping it into the second field. So what I'm expecting is the data is just going to come into those fields, and we've already hooked up that gauge to show the output of the script. So that will continue to work. All right, so here we have our runtime. You can see in those text fields right at the top of the screen that the data continues to change. And that's sort of, in the background, we're continually poking Historian, we're continually getting new values. And as those values come in, even without a user pressing a script, it's just triggering the script to be run whenever one of those inputs changes. Okay. I'll just mention here, if you've had experience with Operations Hub queries, if you've had experience with page building, this is definitely going to build on your previous experiences. You can extend that mental model of how you interact with data, how you interact with widgets. It's now available for scripts as well. So any of the options you had for submitting queries are now open to scripts. You can have them run when a page loads. You can have them run when one input has changed. You can have them run when all of the inputs have been supplied, or you can have them run on an explicit button press. Okay, so those are just all the different options you can have for when your scripts have run. So both of these examples were, I would say, on the more simple side, but they're just to sort of get your feet wet and help you understand some of the scripting functionality. We do see this as very powerful, and we do expect that folks will be writing, more extensive scripts with their custom business logic embedded in those scripts. So wanted to invite you to take a look at that functionality. All right. Well, thank you, folks, for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And that concludes the overview of the Operations Hub 2025 features and functionality. Hopefully, you'll see that we've invested quite a bit in ease of use, especially with the tag binding. Hopefully, you see that we've invested in integration with the Proficy portfolio, particularly with the GraphQL connector. And you've also hopefully see that we're trying to make strides in our extensibility and our flexibility, adding scripting, which allows you to sort of do more customized logic than you would have been able to do before. So with that, I will go ahead and conclude this area of the presentation.